take it back. When I was growing up, I would always sit in front of the TV and watch the Academy Awards, the red carpet. And I was just like, man, I want to be there one day. Like I want to be the person walking the red carpet. And I know that was a calling. I wanted to be in the entertainment industry. So, within years, I was like, okay, what do I do? I have no idea. And I just started picking up. I said, you know what? I want to be a cameraman. So I just started taking pictures, filming videos, this and that. And when I got to college, they were like, hey, you got to take a elective class. And I was like, okay. So I applied for every TV station and nobody hit me back. And I knew somebody, and they were like, yeah, internship is not even they're booked. We can't do it. So I was like, oh fuck. And then somebody told me, hey, I think they're looking for an intern for radio station. So I went ahead and I submit my resume, and I get a call back the next day. He says, hey man, can you come in tomorrow and schedule an interview? I said, sure. Drove down there, sat down with the program director, and he's like asking me questions, and he just saw like I was just so like lit to be walking into the radio station and just seeing the music and just seeing like, oh my God, this is so cool. And walking the same hallways as these, the celebrities, the artists are coming. And it was funny because I remember I kept on asking him questions. And because I was just so amazed. I'm like, yo, who walked the hallway? Or, hey, what celebrity used the bathroom? That type of stuff. And, I just like, he saw that I was hungry. And he said, all right, I'm going to give you the intern. You guys start Monday. You'll be doing at least once or twice a week. And sure, it was for a morning show. And man, at that moment, I saw that I woke up at 3:30 in the morning to be at the radio station at 4:30 because they go on live at 5 a.m. Sorry. And I saw from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m., they had to have a party every day. Like everybody, like they're having the best time of their life, playing music and entertaining everybody. I was just like, yo, this is it. Like this is it. This is where I want to be at. And I just stuck with it. I just stuck with being in radio from that moment on. And I didn't want to go back to TV because, it just, I don't think it never satisfied me like how radio did. And just being part of something that is, growing up as a kid, when my mom was driving me to school and I listened to the morning show, the radio station, I grew up on it. And God, I mean, I'm gonna date myself, but this was like back in when the Rick these days, and I was like, oh my God, like he was doing all kinds of funny stuff, and every morning we would I'll listen to it.
What type of radio shows did you listen to that you were like, oh, that's interesting to me?
Yeah, I would always listen to. There was like a top 40 station, and it was I like the music. It was very you say like very PG when I was in the car with my mom and all that. But then when I'm at home and you're just hitting record on the tape and recording like the songs and calling in, then I'll listen to the hip hop station, and those two were always been my go-to. And everybody that told me, hey, why don't you listen to this other station? Nope, I would never. I was like, I would never listen to that because I'm religiously, those are my two favorite stations. And I was like, there's no reason for me to even to go visit them. And, little by little, like, as in learning the industry, I was like, oh, you know what, let me go listen to them. And yeah, man, I mean, then I started seeing different genres because, it's using the music. I was pulled into the top 40 world, hip hop world. So that's all I listened to. Now, anything outside of that, I didn't care at all because that was, that's what I grew up on and that's what I loved. And, that was just such an inspiration when one day when I get a phone call and say, hey, we want to hire you for this position at the radio station that I grew up listening to. And I was like, wow. Oh my God, it's so crazy. It took some time, but it was I would like to say it was the beginning of my radio career. And that was, back in 2000.
How comfortable were you being your most authentic self in some of these spaces? Because it's very different than like an office culture.
Yeah, you know what it was? And I hate to say it, I never, being a Latino and working for a top 40 station, it was hard because there wasn't a lot of people that looked like me. And the people they were, you almost had to play the white card, and it was very not difficult, but I had to play along with it. And it was very um, knowing your lane and when to step in it and when to step out of it. And I noticed that there was Latino workers, but it never was at the level where, when they really shine, when they were in front of the people, when they were really out there and in the entertainment part of it. Latinos were always in the background. We were, the van drivers. We were, kind of doing the paperwork, the office job, and stuff like that. So that's when I saw, but the representation of it wasn't people that looked like me. It was white people, and that was, that was the face of it. That was the face of it. So, at that point, I noticed that I had to choose. Is this a battle when I go up against that could affect my career, or I just go with it and learn everything I possibly can to grow to where I'm at today. And I did that. I did that because I loved it. Was a passion. It was a passion I wanted to do, and I rather go follow that lane to looking at the big picture. But then when it came down to like seeing the other Latinos in the office, and having that little connection felt good. But then they were also very, and I hate to say the word whitewash, but they were, they know their lane too, so they had to, guess what, yes, I am Latino, but I have to act this way. Those are things I noticed that when I was growing into that genre of music, man. It was very, you sometimes you lose yourself in it, and because you need to, at the end of the day, it's a paycheck, it's a passion, and it's just one of those things where you don't want to, I guess you could say, forget where you came from, but you also have to learn that this is something that's long term, and if you're willing to do something long term, and I was committed to it.
I'm curious for you when you said, you lose yourself. And I agree with that. I think many of us have that phase when we code switch, when we fake it, when we do all those things so that we can get enough experience or we save enough money so we get to the point where it's like, no, I can make my own decision, that I'm gonna feel comfortable being myself. But for you, in what ways do you think you started losing yourself?
I think I lost myself when only thinking about catering to the white people, catering to them. And this is probably one of the best advice. And this is from a white guy who I'm friends today because he really gave me some really good advice growing up, not growing up, like, growing into the industry. And he told me, he says, man, just so you know that when you go somewhere outside, out of, going for another job, and it's a white person that is going to hire you, just know you already have 2 strikes against you just walking into that door, walking right into it. And I was like, I don't get it. And he says, well, first of all, you're a man. So that could be, that could swing, but the overall is that you're Latino. So you're already being downgraded. So guess what? Your paychecks will always fall down. They will be lower than everybody else. And the fact that they're used to grinding the hell out of you, but the thing is, you're gonna have to cater to them.
Yeah.
And that was the rule number 2, is make them like you. And I did that. I had to do that. And the sad part is where, when I was working, when I took that advice when I went to go work at a hip hop station, and the person was a white guy, and I was like, wow, an older white guy, and he just judged me right from the very beginning.
In what way?
He just, I'm Latino. And you would think at a hip hop station, you want a Latino, you want, African Americans, you want Asians. But when you walked in there, you saw how the game was being played. They're like, yeah, okay, what can you do? What is it? So I showed them everything, and the interview process took me longer than the other people that were getting hired. And I was like, wow, because they didn't look like me. And I had to prove myself. They had to give me projects so I could, do the job and show them I can do it. And then when it came down to, what I'm getting paid, bare minimum. It was the bare minimum because obviously, why? If a white guy walks up and I walk up, we're both walking into the same door, into the same office. Who do you think, without saying a word, who do you think is going to get that job? A greater possibility to get that job.
Yeah.
And and that's like, and that's what he told me. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that. And when I realized it and lived through it, I was like, oh my God, like this is true. Because I didn't want to believe it. I really didn't believe it at all. Because I was going to work for a radio station that is, catering to the minorities, catering to, the like they say, the urban community.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of want people that look like me and or look like the audience. But no, man, it was very you had to play the game, and I had to play it, and I was able to get in, and the job was made for two people.
Wow.
And they just gave me that position. Two people were eliminated, so I had to do a job of two people for working hardly anything.
For you, when you say I cater to white people, I mean, I did the same thing. I always tell the story that I used to like study white popular American culture. Like I used to binge watch shows so that, when you're next to the water cooler or whatever it is, and people are like talking this conversation, I could join in. I could be like, oh, I saw that show too. And they could be like, oh, Rick is cool. Pavel is cool. You know what I mean? Like he watches the same shows as us. Like, did you do any of that? Like, what sort of things did you do to cater or to, prove yourself that you are, one of the good guys, as they call it?
And one thing is that I think I'll go back to my childhood, because I think a lot of has to portray that, because, growing up, I was dyslexic, and I had problems with, like, I literally was pretty much walking backwards. Like it was just that bad, and and had ADD. So when it came down to, like, seeing doctors, and my mom was just like freaking out, and they were like, yeah, your son's dyslexic. And she freaked out. My mom thought, like, oh my God, my son's special. Like, oh my God, and I can't believe this is happening. So when it came down to, like, okay, he needs special treatment or like tutoring and stuff like that, then the doctor told me he needs to learn one language. He needs to focus on one thing so he could excel in. And then when he excels on that, then back into Spanish. So luckily I had to live in an American world where, a lot of, I know Spanish growing up. I understood it. Talking was different because I had to stick with one language, because that's what the doctor said, because they're like, hey, let's get him down one thing and then focus on the other. But I had to learn to be, an American person, watching all the English shows. And I think that part I was able to grow from. So when I saw Spanish TV, I always looked at it, was like, like it's just so just disgusting. Like, oh my God.
Same.
Like, yeah. So it's like, I remember growing up, like my grandma always was sábado domingo. Sábado gigante. And I was like, oh my God, there's Don Francisco, this and that. Like, oh, there's a clown, and there's like this and that, and they got the audience singing songs. I'm like, what the? And it's just like, I couldn't wrap my mind around that. And so, but I knew it was on every Saturday. But then, the stuff that my grandma watched, the novelas and stuff like that, I never wanted to be associated with any of that stuff.
Me too.
And so
I thought it was so corny, a lot of it.
Yeah. It was funny because, like, when there was like news where there was a guy dressed as a clown giving out the news, I'm like, how is this even like relentlessly like taking this professional? And no, it was the way how Latinos were, and the fact that the women were half naked at the time, and every, like, the household, like, it was normal, and I was like, oh my God. But yeah, I never wanted to be associated. I didn't want to be learning that culture, that world of Spanish. But keep in mind, I grew up listening to Spanish music because every Saturday morning when my mom's cleaning, Gloria Estefan, Celia Cruz, you have Willie Chirino, because we're Cuban. So that was always blasting Saturday, Sunday. So to this day, that sticks with me. That sticks with me to this day. And I never lost that. That was the one thing I could say that I took with me growing up all my life. But yeah, man, that was I think that was the beginning where I noticed that I wasn't and I hate to say this, wasn't a good Latino. I was a white person. And I kind of moved that direction.
Did people tell you that, or was that a story you told yourself as far as not being a good Latino?
Oh, that was a story to myself. Or, I mean, for instance, if there was hanging around with other Latinos and I heard them speaking Spanish, and I started talking Spanish, they saw I had an accent. Like it wasn't a Spanish accent. It was like an American accent. So I was like, oh my God. And it's like, when I went to public school, because the public school was majority Mexican and Salvadorian. So they were speaking Spanish. And I was like, when I tried to speak Spanish, they were like, oh, nah, this guy's white. He's not with us. He's not with us. And I was like, oh my God.
There's so much judgment that we put on each other and criticize each other. It's like there's levels to the Latino-ness. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we are our worst own like people, man. It's just like it doesn't matter. Like, we judge the fact, oh, you're not Latino because you don't speak Spanish, or you don't look, you have blue eyes and you white skin. It's like, no, you're not Latino. It's like we're horrible. We're horrible. But those are stuff that we have to, as Latinos, to overcome and really kind of change that mindset, because we have this new generation where they don't need to learn Spanish. They don't need to do it. I'm Latino because I have a last name. And I understand the culture, I understand the food, but speaking it is something that they're like true, not choosing, but because of the parents, like they teaching them English because they want them to be American. They want them to have the American dream and all that. And that's kind of like what my mom wanted me to do, is to get the American dream. I'm a U.S. citizen, and I was born in the United States. So guess what? I'm representing the island of Cuba, telling them, hey, my son is American, born and raised in Los Angeles, but he needs to he's showing us that he is being best American and in a good representation for her family. So, and that was something that I saw then when we're fast forward until I started working into radio. And radio was very, you've probably seen this before, where it could be a hip hop station, it could be top 40, CHR. That person who you talk to at the end of the table is going to be white. And now I have to talk to that person as a white person.
And I think that's the case. Let's be real. Like, that's the case in every company. Like, I made a post about, I was like, yo, your favorite brand is probably doing a campaign around Black History Month, but don't forget about like who's in the board of directors, or don't forget who's in the C-suite. Like, just because they got Black people in their ads don't mean that there's Black people in leadership, right? So, but I think it's interesting too, because even in those situations, I'm sure you had ideas around like, yo, we should probably bring up this artist, or we should probably do this segment, or we should probably do this and that. And it's almost like you have to convince them of the idea and educate them because they have no idea, right? Versus if you be like, yo, we should bring on Taylor Swift, it's a no-brainer. They're like, oh yeah. No, my daughter loves Taylor Swift. Let's go.
Yeah.
And those ideas are
that key word that you said, educate, that is a very powerful word during any time right now, because it's funny you say that, because when I was working at the top 40 station in Los Angeles, this is the very beginning of reggaeton. So guess what? You had Daddy Yankee, Gasolina. They're like, oh, this Gasolina song.
Gasolina.
This Gasoline song is really good. I don't know what they're saying, but it's, it's great. This is awesome. And, that was taken off. Then that Don Omar, and I even heard Rackham and Kenny. Heard that.
Yeah.
Yo, I was just like, they were just butchering the hell out of these names. But guess what? I was like, and I remember there was a girl who I was dating. She was into it. She's big. She was like knee deep in that culture before I learned it. So she was telling me like, oh, there's this girl named Evie Queen, this and that. And I remember I said, can you make me a list of the people like you think are really, really good? She gave me a whole list. And and I'm thinking like, oh man, I'm gonna do such a great job because guess what? I'm the Latino that's walking in there with a piece of paper, and he just looked at it and he's like, these are just names. This isn't going anywhere. This, wrap it up and throw it in the trash. I was like, okay. And then there all of a sudden you start seeing them saying, oh, Evie Queen. Oh, we sing Yandel, and that was literally on the piece of paper, that I gave them, but because it wasn't, I didn't look like them. I didn't look like until they noticed where the music was taking off, where people were calling in. People said, we want to hear this, we want to hear this, and they start saying, oh, wait a minute, this reggaeton world is being big.
Yeah.
It's massive.
Yeah.
So they're like, hey, Rick, what does this mean? Hey, Rick, what does that mean? And that was the point that I know. I was like, oh, cool. Now I'm valuable now. I'm valuable. And, they're always coming to me like, oh, what do you, is this somebody that's big in Puerto Rico, this and that? And keep in mind, because I spoke Spanish, they thought I was Puerto Rican, Mexican, Salvadorian, Cuban. Like I represent the whole nation of Latinos, But I just was like, it was weird because in a way, I felt like, oh, now this is my time to shine. This is, this is the way I'm gonna get my foot in the door. And they just used me. And so that when they saw an opportunity, like, who were the biggest artists at that time, and I just I gave them a list, and they went to Puerto Rico, and they brought a guy who was Mexican but didn't speak a lick of Spanish, and they brought him to help translate. And I was like, oh, this is hilarious. And they saw, they're like, oh, we don't understand what Daddy Yankee said. Oh, we don't know what what these people are saying. So they had somebody in staff that barely spoke English had to translate in broken English to get the answers, because they noticed like we'll do whatever it takes. And then when it got back to me, I had to edit it, because guess what? I was the Latino that had to edit the Spanish stuff because there was nobody there that can do it.
Speaking of like reggaeton blowing up and just Spanish music in general, I remember the first time I heard a Spanish song, like a full Spanish song, on Hot 97, which for the listeners that don't know, it's a hip hop station, radio station in New York. It might have been, well, no, that's not true. There's a few songs that I've probably heard no, matter of fact, this was Funk Flex playing it. So it wasn't like DJ Camelo or like the other Spanish DJ or the other Latino DJs. It was like Funk Flex. I heard a Bad Bunny song on Funk Flex, and he was dropping bombs on it. I was like, what is happening? I'm like, am I listening to the right station? Are they dropping bombs on La Mega now? I was like, yo, I'm wondering for you, like, I'm sure there are some like pivotal moments in music history where everyone just started paying attention. Like, was it Gasolina? Was it Despacito? Was it Bad Bunny? What was that turning point for you where you were like, now they're gonna listen to me?
It was funny because there's two waves. We got the beginning of reggaeton, and we have the second wave of reggaeton. So I think the first one was when I noticed that the English rappers were co-signing Tego Calderón. You saw them co-signing Don Omar. You saw them, like, I remember Fat Joe, 50 Cent was talking about Tego, and I was like, yo, Tego was at that time, I was like, oh my God, like I remember seeing on TV, a late night, they used to play videos. And I was sitting there and I was like, who is this guy rapping in Spanish with an afro? But the beat was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, I was like, nah, Spanish music, I don't mess with it. But I was like, oh my God, this dude is killing it. Then about a couple weeks later, I'm watching MTV and I see Fat Joe talking about it. I see 50 Cent start talking about it. I was like, oh, okay, he's being co-signed. And then we see Big Pun. You know, we start seeing that wave of the Latinos of now shining. And I think that's where I started. Like, oh, we're hot now. Now we're hot. Now we're making. Now we're tapping a market where it hasn't been touched, and now we're welcoming them into our world. But keep in mind, they still have control.
Mm-hmm.
So they. That's when I noticed that there was that now Latinos are shining. The second wave was, I think it was like got 10 years later, like more than that, where I've always said this. When J Balvin dropped Energia, and that was the album that introduced and gave the second life to reggaeton. That was the album that had that dembow beat that was played 10 years ago. And he did it in such a way where people jumped back on it. And like, oh, what is this? Yo, this is hard. He, in that same album, he also put begin like Land Trap.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the song with the Snapchat where you go like, Snoop Dogg did it, but I was like, hey, this is the same beat. So he introduced, a couple genres off that album. And then I started seeing other artists doing reggaeton. So we start seeing reggaeton coming back. And then you start seeing a new wave of reggaeton coming in. And I said, oh, this is happening.
There was a part of me that was like kind of ashamed of reggaeton because a lot of people were making fun of it. People were like, it's the same beat. How could you tell the difference? Or, yo, have you seen the Gasolina video? That looks corny compared to like a 50 Cent video. It was just like, there wasn't a pride in it for me. And like, it made it a little bit easier. Well, I listened to it on my side, but like externally prideful, like not that much for me, right? Like I wasn't be like, yo, play that Don Omar track. You know what I mean? But as it grew in popularity, I think it was easier for me to embrace it a little bit more, right? And not only listen to it on my own, but me like making requests and me blasting it, whatever. Like, did you also get more of that pride as it gained more popularity?
It's funny because like you went through exactly what I was going into at that time, because at the time I was working for a radio station. This is now the first time I'm walking into my first Spanish radio station that was at that time was owned by SBS and which is La Mega. Now it's called La Mega, but it's always been called La Mega in New York, but in LA it was called Latino 963. And when I first got up, because I went from working from a top 40 station, being number one, to go work for a land station. And, and I felt like I went from, I guess from Beverly Hills, and I'll make a reference, LA reference, from Beverly Hills to now to ghetto South Central. And I was like, wow, just like the crowd completely different. And you start seeing that now this is urban. Now this is music made for low class people. That's what I started seeing, because there was these were the people that weren't these were the helpers. The people listening to this were the helpers. These are the ones that who had to work 2 or 3 jobs to also help the family, and to see that and like for some reason I looked at it, was like I felt like I was above them. That's the thing, and that took me a second to humble my ass down, because that was working from a radio station when everything was handed to you. Everything, like every artist wanted to be on that radio station. Everybody wanted to go there, and they would go there. Now into a brand new radio station that that's only play reggaeton and a dabble of hip hop, and that was where I saw that that like the same thing. It was like this. It all sounds the same. That Bombi was just over and over and over, and then it goes. And I remember that it's like our parents saying like we're listening to hip hop. It's like, hey, ¿qué están haciendo? ¿Qué es? That's not music. Eso no es música. This and that. I was like, oh my god. And it's it was one of those things. But then it was the people who listened to it were the people that looked like you and I, and I noticed that, and and I was just like, okay. Then after a year later, I started noticing English speaking stations. They started getting rid of it, and you probably hear dabble here and there every once in a while, but no. And the clubs, especially the club scene, that was like exactly the same thing. Like you see these kids perreando and grinding, literally humping on the floor. That was it. And I remember where somebody made a value point was, why does Don Omar, why does Daddy Yankee need to come to this radio station? Because if they're performing at these small little venues, clubs that hold probably 200 or 300, I go, when these artists go down to South America, they're playing coliseums.
Yeah.
So just imagine that from something so massive that they're doing, they're doing it at the back of a restaurant that they have a club area.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh shit, that's right. Like that's so true. So seeing that made perfect sense. Why they didn't want to come to us? Why was it that they didn't want to almost? They know we play the music, but it never really valued them.
Yeah.
And that was really, really sad. But then within time, popularity, then you start performing at bigger venues, and now they start coming to the radio station. Now you got festivals. Now they're performing at these these festival Cali bashes and stuff like that, and it's like, okay, now they're going to do the rounds.
I'm curious too, because you've a lot of your experiences working in radio stations, but eventually you made the move to a tech company. Was that experience and you feeling comfortable being yourself any different than when you were working in radio?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to be part of a team that is very, they're very open. They want to know what's going on. Like there's no judgment there. It's just everybody's just as hungry to learn, to tap in, and how to make things bigger, how to make it stand out more. And I think that's something where I'm happy to see that, and just kind of being very open to changes in the industry, in the music scene, and helping artists kind of develop as well. It's a different ball game. It's a different ball game, because I've always said that where I'm at today, it took me 20 years to get to where I'm at today, but what I'm using now is the best qualities I learned in that working in radio. Because working in radio, you wear multiple hats. I mean, multiple. I was the morning show producer. I was the imaging guy. I was also sales at some point. I had to do production. It was just consistently you were wearing multiple hats, doing drive a band too after producing a show. You just wore multiple hats.
I think it's fascinating from where you were earlier, where you were a little bit insecure about certain things, whether it be the dyslexia, whether it be the speaking Spanish, or other Latinos judging you on how Latino you are, right? Me personally, like if I was in front of the people that you were in front of, like taking pictures of J Balvin and Karol G, and I mean, I'd be insecure. I'd be like, oh my God, I gotta practice my Spanish before I talk to Carol. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not ready to talk to Jose in my Spanish. Like, do you get insecure? Like, or are you like very confident at this point in your life?
No, not confident at all. I mean, it's like when you're in a room with a bunch of Puerto Ricans and you're like, oh, my Spanish is horrible compared to everybody here. And it's like, oh my God. And I remember when I was thrown in the studio with Bad Bunny and I had to coach him. And, this is the beginning of his career. This is where, was of No Me Mete Cabra, Tu No Mete Cabra, that's the one, and before we got to Chambea. And I had to be in a studio coaching him to do, a radio show. And it was crazy because at that point I was like, oh my God, my Spanish is horrible. I gotta practice. I gotta practice. And I knew that I wanted to, at that point I was like, yeah, I definitely want to work in the Spanish. Like Spanish was where it kept on taking me. As much as I wanted to pull away from, it just kept on taking me to Spanish. And I was like, there has to be a reason why. The other day, I was like, dang, my Spanish is horrible again. It's horrible again. So, I'm like, cool, I'm going to go to Colombia. I'm forced to speak Spanish. I'm forced to go out there for a week and a half and just kind of speak Spanish to the people. So now I have to, brush up on my Spanish because guess what? They're good judging the hell out of me. They're going to judge the hell out of me because they're like, oh, where are you from? And I'll say from Los Angeles. But then they always ask me, no. But that Spanish is different. I say, oh, my parents from Cuba, this and that. They're like, oh, okay. We kind of hear that. I was like, oh, damn it. That's like the slap to the face. It's like, we kind of hear that. I'm like, oh. So, but yeah, man, no, that's what I do. I kind of train myself to go into an area where I'm forced to speak Spanish.